next speaker is Glen Park. Glen is the Assistant Attorney General and Coordinator of the Nebraska Human Trafficking Task Force. Glen graduated from the University of Nebraska College of Law.
You really want to hear all this?
Well, now I can't cheer for you.
In 2001 and clerked at the Nebraska Supreme Court before working as a litigator at a full-service business law firm in Lincoln. Glen then spent 9 years in India fighting sex trafficking there as a legal director of an anti-human trafficking organization and helping develop a border monitoring strategy for Tiny Hands International, a group stopping human trafficking across the Nepal-India border. Returning to Nebraska in 2015, Glen clerked again at the Nebraska Supreme Court before joining the Attorney General's office in August of 2016 to assist in the ongoing formation and operation of the Nebraska Human Trafficking Task Force. Please welcome Glen Park.
Well, I want to thank, I suppose I should use the mic. I want to thank Buffy and whoever else helped organize this. I love this kind of awareness raising stuff. It's part of what I really dream about for Nebraska, is that we get this army of people who actually can see what's been thriving in the shadows for so long. So I want to thank them, and I want to thank Doc, and I'm sorry, I got with your mouth full. Dina, okay. I mean, for coming so far and helping out. And actually, I want to start with, Buffy just talked about all my professional bona fides, but you know, this is a Viking-led thing, so I want to make sure I give you my bona fides. This is my father-in-law with my nephew, and he's on a bright yellow Harley. So, and he's actually with he's a Christian Motorcycle Association, and they're called Sons of Thunder, something like this. Anyway, so this is in Dublin, Ireland, so that's the group. And actually, I did live in India for a while, and I had a Royal Enfield Machismo 500 cc's. Doesn't sound very big, but it is the largest production bike made in India. So, all right, with that, that's not really why I'm here. Okay, so my understanding is you guys have talked about what trafficking is, what human trafficking is, modern day slavery, and I heard Doc allude to earlier in the day, you talked about some signs to look for. So, you know what it is, and we won't belabor that because I have a limited amount of time. But thank goodness it doesn't happen very much in America and not in Nebraska. This is good life, right? I do encounter this. I know the people sitting here who take their time out of their Saturday to come here, that's probably humorous. But even with law enforcement, as I work across the state, there is some reluctance and disbelief that this kind of thing happens systemically in Nebraska. And I actually want to not criticize those people, but I'm going to tell you a story that's a little embarrassing, because as was explained, I did this. I mean, anti-human trafficking work was what I did in another country for a long time. We lived there, we'd come back every other summer for a little time to visit people. And we'd come back in 07 and 09, it was probably 09, maybe even 2011, before this is my job, right? This is my field, before I realized that there really was a problem. Of course, I knew about Atlanta and Houston and stuff for a long time, but it really is a problem. So I am, okay, so as the task force, kind of the things we're trying to do is get people to realize it is happening here. So I'm going to talk a bit more. I assume you haven't heard a lot of stuff about Nebraska specific statistics, so that's kind of what I'm going to focus on there, and try to hope give you a little bit of tools, maybe even to convince others. And then to recognize the signs. So that I won't belabor because I think you went on that. And then once we've recognized it, to know how to respond and who to inform. Okay, so some of you are convinced or motivated by anecdotes. You hear a story about a particular person, you're like, I have got to do something about that. Other people who are skeptical and maybe more left-brained are convinced by quantitative research. And the problem is, so far, we haven't had much quantitative research on Nebraska specific, and really, honestly, across the states, this is kind of a relatively new phenomenon. There was no law against human trafficking until 2000. That's 17 years ago. It wasn't called that, at least. So what happened was, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but explaining it, but Creighton University has 2 data scientists, and they have been what they call scraping Backpage, which is when you take basically a snapshot of every ad on Backpage. Now, you may know, as far as we know, most sex trafficking happens now online, and a vast majority of online sex trafficking, again, as far as we know, there's a lot of stuff in the dark web we don't know about, but most of what we know about happens on a website called Backpage. It's like Craigslist or something like that. There are 5 sites in Nebraska. So if you wanted to sell your motorcycle, you'd go to Omaha or Lincoln or Grand Island, North Platte, Scotts Bluff, right? So there's 5 sites. You go there and you try to sell and buy stuff. Well, they have, I think what mostly they're known for is this adult escort section. So what Creighton University does is 4 times a day, they take a snapshot of every ad across the entire country that Backpage puts up. So let's say, real quickly, I'll just explain how this works for us. If we find, we do an operation, and there's someone with a phone, and we dump her phone, and we have some phone numbers of other people, we can give those phone numbers to Creighton, and they can tell us for the last 2 years where that person is advertised for. So we can get a real pattern. So that's some of the cool stuff that's going on. Anyway, so they have analyzed all this information for Nebraska specifically, and here's a heat map. So as it happens, if there's one person who's mentioned a particular city, it pops up as blue. If there's a few more, then it turns more green, and if it turns more and more, then it gets red. So what happened apparently is on the Scotts Bluff page, somebody said willing to go to Bridgeport. Has anybody ever been to Bridgeport? It's not a large city, but apparently, at least the person who's advertising thought that there was enough of a market in Bridgeport, Nebraska, to mention that in their ad. That's how it pops up if it's not one of the main ones there. So this just gives you, and honestly, it's this is a I-80 corridor, obviously. Nebraska City doesn't pop up on there, but I want to remind you of a couple things. First of all, sex trafficking is one type of human trafficking. There's also labor trafficking. We're going to focus, we're going to start giving some lectures throughout the state focusing on that, so we're a little bit more aware of that. Also, there's a lot of other types of sex trafficking that happens besides online, like massage parlors, nail salons. There's also truck stops where the people just come up and proposition. They don't have to advertise anywhere. That's a lot harder to see. So just because it doesn't show up here doesn't mean that it isn't happening here. So what they've done is, and I want to clarify, this is not sex trafficked people right now. This slide here is just people being offered for sale. Some of them may be willing, and so they would be prostitutes, but we think a lot of them aren't. And I'll get into that in a second. But there are 900 unique individuals. So if an individual advertises more than once, the Creighton people know how to not count that twice. 900 unique individuals that are for sale for sex in Nebraska a month. 900 different ones. And there you can see a little bit of the breakdown by city, and of course some of them advertise in more than one place, so it adds up to more than 900. Now, I just said that they're not all sex trafficking victims, we think. So what Creighton has also done is looked at some risk factors. And if there's no risk factors, then they're low. You can see it's kind of self-explanatory there. Let me give you some ideas of what a risk factor might be. If there's a 2-girl special, that's a big red flag, because often what they're doing is they're training someone who's new, or someone they don't trust yet, or kind of someone who's new to it, so that seems like an exploitative situation. If one phone number is associated with a bunch of different people for sale, that often looks like there's probably a pimp or someone controlling these people. And third one is if the ad says high school or just turned 18 yesterday, that actually was on one, chances are very high that they're not 18, but they're not going to say that out loud. So and unfortunately there's a big market for underage teens. So depending on how many risk factors there are, they kind of thought about 50% of these ads are at high risk. And that means then, of the 900, 135 of those being advertised are at high risk. Now I want to be very clear, technically it's 900 for sale. It says sold there. We don't have information on the actual transactions, but If they're being advertised here, there must be a market, and at least a large majority of them are for sale. So that's pretty hard statistical, quantitative evidence. There are also, I'll explain to you in a minute how Nebraska is kind of organized across the state to fight this in the task force. But there are several investigations going on. There's been several arrests. There's a few prosecutions going on, and I want to talk to you about the biggest headline, just to give you one anecdote. This man's name is Anthony Swindle. That's his last name, Swindle. And he was sentenced. He was convicted and sentenced earlier this year. It was actually the first time someone has been prosecuted to a jury under Nebraska's law. So the federal law, that's been happening a lot, but under Nebraska law, for some reason, it's always been pled out. So this guy didn't want to plead out, or he didn't have the prosecutor wanted to take it. So we went to court and to the trial. And what happened was he's from Omaha, so this is in Nebraska, and he was driving by in this low-functioning 15-year-old girl. She testified in court. She was, a good witness, but, and Chris here, who you'll hear next, she was amazingly helpful because she is maybe functionally 12 years old, would you say, about? So anyways, he took himself, had her for himself and sold her to a few other people. And so that's sex trafficking of a minor. And there was another, in fact, this is a cool story. So her parents, so she was out, mad at her parents, so left her house, and they put up a, missing persons, as parents would do. And a police officer who was, they look at that, look at the photo, just so that they'll see them around. Then he was also looking at the back page, because police do this because they want to see what red flags come up so they can act on it. And he connected the two phases. So they were able to, act immediately and go and rescue her and one other person. And so this happened. So this does happen. This is one more shot of him. And he's been convicted, and the appeal will come later this year, and I get to handle it before the Supreme Court, so I'm kind of excited about that. It was a very good case. I don't know what they're going to come up with to try to overturn it, but they always try. Okay, so hopefully, probably already before I started talking, but hopefully by now you guys realize this is happening in Nebraska. It's even happening outside of Omaha and Lincoln. And so part of what we hope to do as a task force, and in some of this, events like this, is to help you recognize the signs. And again, I'm not going to belabor it, but I want to give you a little vision I have of what you will do with the tools you've already been given about the signs. When I lived in India, I lived in India for a while, and when people come from here to India to visit, one of the first things they notice as soon as they walk out of the airport is the trash. It's ubiquitous, it's everywhere, especially outside in the big cities, just on the streets and stuff. It's just everywhere, and nobody seems to pick it up. And I used to think, I just used to think, why do people do this? And it's too bad. If they just had more education, maybe they wouldn't do that. But I guest lectured at a law school in India for 1 week a month for 3 years. And I had law professor friends who were much more accomplished, much smarter than I was. And we would go out, for lunch or something, and they'd, finish the thing and just throw it there on the street. That's just, it's a cultural thing, really. It's not a, intellect thing. And so I thought of this metaphor that if you were walking through a nice park, here in Nebraska City, and somebody in front of you, has a McDonald's bag or something, just throws it on this nicely cut green grass, blue sky, you would instantly, even subconsciously, you would be like, something doesn't fit in here, right? And it's that piece of trash that's on the nice grass. Now, it's not a perfect analogy, but I would love for Nebraska to get to the point where a lot of people see something and they're not quite sure exactly what is wrong, but there's something that's funny. And because you've been to something like this, you can actually put there's a few hangers you can hang things like. That's kind of like what that one story was told about when I went to that seminar. And then we'll be able to alert the right people. So that's kind of the dream I have, and I want to thank you all really for spending time out of your Saturday to learn more about this. So then the next thing is to respond. Again, I think this has been gone over, but if it's an emergency, if someone's being dragged by their hair into a car, kicking and screaming, you call 911, right? It's emergency, and the law enforcement, we have coordinated a lot of law enforcement agencies, so if it is a trafficking situation, we'll figure that out. If it's something less urgent, call the 1-800 number I heard that mentioned earlier. It's 888-37-37-888. And that is like, let's say there's a massage parlor in your neighborhood, and it seems like only guys go at lunchtime and after 7, and no one else seems to come or go. It just seems funny, but it's not an emergency. Then you would call them, and what they do is they write up everything you've said on an email, and I get it at the Attorney General's office. Homeland Security, FBI, and the State Patrol. There's one person in each of those agencies that get it. And we coordinate to figure out who goes. It's usually the State Patrol. And looks at that. I'm going to tell you a really quick fun story. It turned out okay, but there was a tip about a trucker who had this, he was like 40s or 50s, and he had this, something looked like maybe a 14, 15-year-old girl, disheveled. She seemed a bit, dazed or something. And they went in the truck stop together and then got in the truck and left. So they're like, this seems weird. So they called Polaris. Polaris contacted Jeff Blowski of the State Patrol. This was, I think, in the Grand Island area, so he contacted his lieutenant there. They went to the truck stop. They got the video. They got the license plate, the trucking company. They called the trucking company. And sure enough, the trucking company said that the gentleman who was driving it asked permission to bring his daughter with him. And by that time, the truck had ended up, and I think it was in Scottsdale off Omaha. And so the patrolman there actually stopped the truck and talked to him, and sure enough, it all checked out. It was all good. His daughter had slept the night before and just was disheveled and stuff. But that's an excellent. It worked exactly like it was supposed to, because the next time somebody sees something like that, and it's like this weird thing, and it just kind of feels a bit funny. Somebody should check it out. That's going to be the one chance we have for an actual victim to help them out. So, anyway, that's my plug for the hotline. So, if you do call us, if you find out something either through a proactive operation or because you've called either one of these numbers, what are we as a task force doing? So, let me just say real quick. Doug Peterson is the Attorney General. When he ran for Attorney General, one of the things he said he was going to focus on was human trafficking. And one of the biggest ways fulfilling that is through this task force in conjunction with the Salvation Army. So, that's okay. So, we kind of have, just to keep our minds focused, we have 3 objectives. To help survivors and victims, and I think Chris will probably talk a bit more about that next, but really that is intentionally first. We are a victim-focused task force. It's better for the victim, obviously, if we're always thinking about how this is our protocol and how it's affecting them. And as a prosecutor, it's better for prosecution if we can establish that relationship early and the positive relationship. Of course, with that, we want to stop the traffickers. We want to catch them and prosecute them and create a very large disincentive to do this in Nebraska and to eliminate the market. We recognize there's a supply and demand here, and we want to address both sides of that. So the task force consists of law enforcement, service providers, and community partners. Law enforcement's pretty obvious. I think the next slide has a bunch of people. So Attorney General's Office, the Salvation Army, again, is our co-partner in leading the task force. There's the State Patrol, there's DHHS, that's our local Health and Human Services, Homeland Security investigations, and just many groups that come together and play their part in this, and we're trying to organize this better and better. Community partners, so service providers is probably clear, they're the people who provide services to victims. Community partners can be a lot of different types. Healthcare, a lot of the trafficking victims come in contact with a healthcare provider while they're being trafficked, because if they're sick, they have to bodily come to a place. So training them is good. Hospitality is, a lot of this stuff happens in hotels and motels, so that's important. And so we try to have community partners in many different areas. So it's my understanding that this is how we typically work. We do our thing, and then we let other people do their thing, and never the twigs shall meet. but we really intentionally have what we're calling a community caretaking model. I won't go into the details of this, but basically we're working together, we meet together. This series of lectures I was telling you about that we're doing on labor trafficking, we intentionally every year have service providers and law enforcement in the same room together for a day, and some community people too. Now it would be more, in one sense it would be more efficient if I had only law enforcement, so I could only talk about law enforcement stuff, but we think it's more important that we create this dynamic across the 2 and 3 areas. So and we do have special training for law enforcement and the service providers too, but we do this once a year to come together. Okay, so yes, you have a question? Yeah, excellent.
Can you give me a definition of labor trafficking?
Sure. Yeah, very good question. What's labor trafficking? So it is, in a sense, human trafficking, right, is what we're talking about, and there's a few other types. Mainly it's sex trafficking and labor trafficking. And sex trafficking is a sex act it's a commercial sex act, you exchange that for money or anything else of value. And either against your will, or you're under 18 and you can't legally consent to a commercial sex act, so that's automatically trafficking. Labor trafficking is, in a similar way, modern day slavery. It's working, you're doing something of commercial value, some type of labor that you've secured, that the trafficker has secured through, again, force, fraud, or coercion, some way in which they're not willingly working. I will tell you, this isn't exclusively true, but mostly it's foreign nationals. This is not for sex trafficking, but for labor trafficking. A lot of it is they're not here, they're not allowed to work here. So there's a big, they're already vulnerable because they're here, and a lot of them, a couple different things. A lot of them are threatened that they'll be deported if they don't do the job. Many people where they come from, I've worked in a country like this where the police are very corrupt and you never win when you go to the police. So a threat, say, look, remember that not only are you here illegally, remember I made you steal that box of cigarettes or whatever? I'm going to turn you in if you don't do what I'm going to say. So stuff like that. And finally, there's a lot of cultural, so we found, I won't say where, but there was a hotel run by Indian nationals. I'll talk about this because I know a bit about Indian culture. And they had working for them some Indian nationals of a lower caste. And so culturally, they weren't allowed to leave. So they were working 17 hours a day, were getting fed and got to sleep in the place, but they weren't paid at all. So anything that's it's basically slavery of a different name. And it doesn't have to be chains and whips. It can be psychological manipulation. I don't know if we talked about that with sex trafficking, but that happens in labor trafficking as well. So Nebraska is a big state, so we divided the state into a couple different sections, and in each of these sections we have what we call a regional team. So it consists mostly of law enforcement, but of course the Salvation Army is there, the Child Advocacy Center, which does a lot of forensic interviews of the victims, especially if they're minors, and some other community partners. So they meet at least quarterly. Some of them meet monthly to share resources, to compare stories, to talk about what they've been seeing, and to plan proactive operations. So that is the law enforcement side.
Glenn, could you explain what proactive ops are?
Sure, yeah. There is a lingo as with any industry, I suppose, and I try hard not to use terms that aren't defined, but I forgot that. So a proactive operation is where law enforcement didn't get a call necessarily that something is happening, so we're reacting to a call. You see how that would be reactive, right? If you call 911 or Polaris and we react to that as soon as we can, that's a reactive situation. But a proactive operation is maybe what you know of as a sting. So it's where we have a suspicion about something, we set something up, maybe we've been communicating, pretending to be a John with someone who's being advertised, or pretending to have a fake ad on Backpage and trying to get customers, buyers to come. And we set something up like that, and so it's very well planned out weeks in advance, and it's coordinated and all that, in distinction to a reactive situation, like when that one girl was rescued, the low-functioning 15-year-old, that was like, we found it, we've got to move now, and so it goes differently. So the reactive operations, to do it well, you have to plan a lot, you've got to make sure there's a critical mass of people there, all the teams, we have to coordinate with service providers, because again, with our approach, we want to have a victim advocate, which is somebody who is looking out for and specially trained to deal with trauma-informed people, trauma-affected people. And so we want to make sure that they're as close to first contact with the victim as possible. So all this, it takes a lot of work. So that's why we have to meet quite regularly to kind of plan these things out. We've had a few successful such operations. So Captain Jeff is the nationwide thing. If you call the hotline and you say it's an emergency, I want to talk to law enforcement agency, he'd be the first one. If you call it from here, the first person he would bring on the line is Lieutenant John Craig, because he is the local guy here. And the team for this Southeast team is Tim Hansen. He's an investigator with Gage County, so he's the one who kind of organizes this all. So that helps too. So I'm just trying to give you an idea of kind of how we've rolled this out across the state. There are 3 trafficking specialists. Chris is one of them, and she'll explain more about what she does, but there's 3 of them to cover the 6 areas. So they each have 2 areas, and that's a very large geographic area to cover. Chris has, of course, the most populous corner of our state, so she covers a lot of people and a lot of activity. That's how we coordinate there. Child Advocacy Center, as I mentioned, we work with them, so they're covered the state as well. I want to leave, I'll talk for 5 more minutes, and then I think we'll have 10 minutes for some more questions. So some things that we've done so far in Nebraska to try to get a handle on this. We have this team structure, so we're learning from each other. I communicate with the team leaders a couple times a month, and we develop tools like pocket cards, which I can show you. Law enforcement, we hand out these pocket cards so they have both things to look for. So again, this isn't everybody's life. They have lots of other crimes to look at. So this is just a reminder of what to look for, some of the stuff you've heard earlier today probably. And then once you start, you realize there's some questions to ask, and then it's got Jeff Pulaski's number and a few other numbers to call if they need, including services. So there is one number that's 24-hour for services, and Chris has to have that number every once in a while to be on call, because let's say a patrolman on the highway pulls over somebody for speeding at 2 in the morning, and he's 35 years old, and he's got 3 inappropriately dressed, unrelated teenagers in his car. If that patrolman has been to our training, he's like, something doesn't look quite right here. So you separate them out, ask some questions. Maybe one of the 16-year-olds says, yeah, he's making us do this. That patrolman knows exactly what to do with that 35-year-old driver, right? This is old hat, throw him in jail, do the paperwork tomorrow, whatever. But now he's got 3 16-year-old girls at the most vulnerable moment of their lives, in a sense. What do? Well, you call the number, and Chris is on call a lot of times, and so she'll be able to connect you to whatever. So standard operating procedures, learning from each other, and like I mentioned before, that Creighton stuff. By the way, I have that Creighton research stuff I've mentioned before. I have 2 of these. I'll leave them with whoever. Maybe you could have one. And it's got a lot more information than I gave you, of course, but they've been a big help with our law enforcement efforts. I'll talk just about LB 289, and then we'll get to questions. So this was a legislation that came through, and actually I want to mention Dave Lemoyne. He's very accomplished in this field in Montana, and now lives in Nebraska, and was a big help in getting us get this passed, actually, and to help him testify before the Judiciary Committee, which is the first route into the legislation. I just appreciate him being here and his leadership in this state in that way. There were several changes. One of the major changes was there was a drastic increase in penalties. As I said before the Judiciary Committee, the way it stood before this bill did not reflect Nebraska values. It was pathetically low. Now it's higher than the federal law in some cases. So it's definitely got a big bite. We have to start using it now. We have to go out and start finding people and prosecuting them. So I think with those 2, it'll be a huge disincentive. So we raised the penalties a lot. And then I think this next slide. So there's, of course, labor trafficking. This is sex trafficking. I'm just going to highlight right now the word solicit. Now, I am a lawyer, and we get really excited when words change in statutes, because that's just what we do, right? We work with laws. Well, the ramifications of that particular word that we added are pretty big, and I'm going to explain it to you. Solicit is a term of art meaning, in this context, meaning purchasing a prostitute or a sex act. So not just the one who recruited this person and psychologically broke them down, or pretended to be in love with him, or forced him in whatever way. That person is a trafficker. But now the person who buys a trafficking victim can also be prosecuted as a trafficker. And if you'll remember, this has probably come up today already, anyone under the age of 18 can't without consent, cannot legally consent to a commercial sex act. As in Nebraska, we say that's not possible. So if you pay for sex with a very mature-looking 17-and-a-half-year-old, she looks like she's 21, right? You could be prosecuted and convicted for sex trafficking of a minor. It's class B1, that's the type of penalty, minimum 20 years. Maximum life. So honestly, and you might want to tell your friends, because this is something I really would love to get out there, because we could pass a law, but if people don't know about it, it's not doing its job, or if we don't apply it, of course. But if you get convicted of that, the judge has no choice but to sentence you for 20 years. So remember I said it was a market, there's a demand and a supply side. Well, this is addressing the demand side pretty strongly, so that'll be interesting. Okay, we have a website, and on the AG's homepage, there's 5 or 6 buttons. One of them is human trafficking, and then there's a button about get informed and get involved. So I think that leaves us about 10 minutes for questions. I'm hoping this. To what?
That law.
The law, yeah. You want the statute?
Oh, yeah.
It's 28-830 is the definition, and 831 is this.
Okay.
Or, actually, this is kind of both. It's 830 is where you find this language, but the penalty is in 831. And I don't know if it matters. It was LB. Oops. 289. It's a legislative bill. Any questions about what we're doing in Nebraska, or what is the next step, or what? Yeah.
Okay, so I hear you talk about community partners.
Right. Okay.
Be more specific about what community partners are.
Sure. Well, community partners honestly is kind of a catch-all. If you're not trained as a law enforcement officer or a prosecutor, or as specially trained to deal with victims, that it's kind of everybody in this room who doesn't fall into one of those 2 categories could be a community partner, and we intentionally want to include that. Honestly, we're going to be better at this eventually, at incorporating people who want to help. And one way, I'll explain, we're working on what's called a speakers bureau. So we do get requests to speak at things like this a lot, and I have some knowledge because of my job, but there are a lot of people who could do what I'm doing right now who don't have my job, but are good at public speaking, better than me probably, and I could give them this PowerPoint and a little bit of training. So we're actually working on doing that, and so within, I think, 6 months or something, we'll start to train people who couldn't go out and train. So if someone in Chadron, which is a long way from here, wants someone to speak at a high school, and there's someone maybe in Scottsbluff, which is a lot closer than we are, has been trained, and we'll give them the PowerPoint and say go for it, right? So that's one way. A similar program of people that we've worked with a lot is the Hotel Motel Project. And they have a train-the-trainer program, so they take a day out and they get trained on how to train hospitality, so hotel and motel people, and then they go to the managers and ask if they can have a 1 or 2 hour session with the staff and just give them, the tips on what does sex trafficking look like in a hotel, and there's some obvious and some not so obvious signs, so that's a big help. The other thing is these special categories. So health care, I spoke at the Nebraska Medical Association in Nebraska, and they were very interested about that statistic. 88% of trafficking victims have come in contact with a healthcare professional while they were trafficked. So while they're trafficked, somebody brings them into the emergency room or to a clinic or something, And if those people are trained to know the signs, that's really a precious moment, a window of opportunity that we have as a society to recognize what's going on and alert somebody. So we very much want to encourage, those people there. The teachers, of course, I think Polaris says, I know there's a lot of numbers going around, but Polaris has done a lot of research, and they say that the age of entry into sex trafficking is between 15 and 18. I've heard lower than that. It doesn't matter if it's high school or it's in school. So it's very important that high school, counselors and nurses and teachers, and honestly, to some extent, high school students who know a lot more than the rest of us, or even the school staff know about what's going on. Who's, got the boyfriend that's 21 and she leaves for lunch and never comes home till the next day or whatever. We're just trying to engage with a lot of people, and especially those in specific, or like just further education for those in strategically placed things. Yeah.
And is there a way to get around the HIPAA requirement when they're dealing with health professionals? I mean, do you have to get the girl to sign a consent so you can report what's happening to her to the police?
That's a very good question. I'm going to punt this one. I'm going to say a little bit, but Chris is coming up later. She probably knows more than that than I do.
Right.
But
I think it's a little different when you're talking about a healthcare professional versus a service provider, though.
right.
Regarding HIPAA, so it depends on where the person comes in, what door that person comes in.
So that's part of the answer. Obviously, a consent form waives. You have rights, but you can waive them. So I honestly don't know the particulars of HIPAA, and again, depending on which area it is.
Next question is this: do you have a counterpart in other states that you work with that could help to facilitate the introduction of laws similar to the one we got passed in Nebraska in, say, Iowa, Colorado, South Dakota, North Dakota, Kansas? Because, I think it's in the two states in which we've tried to get it passed without one.
That's right.
Vote. I mean, it's a win-win situation.
There was no opposition.
We just got to point it out to them, bring it to their attention.
Yeah.
Do you have people in other states that we could contact to say, look, this is what you need to do, because it's completely effective?
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. The answer is yes. I'm a part of what's called the compendium, I think, where it's people like me, the coordinators of task forces. So Alicia and I are both on it. And it probably involves 20 states maybe. So we have one topic a month, and we talk, and we have a calling or a conference call. This particular matter hasn't come up since I've joined this, but it's something I could put on the short list of things to talk about and to push. And we do, certainly if there's occasion to, we liaison with others. For some reason, there's a line between Houston and Omaha. There seems to be a lot of activity that happens between the two. So I've contacted my counterparts in Houston quite a bit. So we have a
I was in Houston for 15 years.
Oh, I forgot that. Okay.
Yeah, in fact, the girl that's working on the big cases down there is a friend of mine.
Oh, yeah. So there is this communication, and I haven't specifically looked at kind of pushing or seeing if we could help with legislation, but I'm certainly willing to do that. You had a question?
And as far as HIPAA law,
Okay.
if you're as a healthcare worker, if you're taking care of a minor in a situation, you're a mandatory
Right.
reporter.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
that kind of takes care of HIPAA.
Right.
You have
Did everybody hear that?
Yeah.
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 Is there, yeah.
Last Saturday, I found me at a walk,
Yes.
and Patty Penzing Brooks told us her next challenge is legislation in expunging the crime from the victim's records.
Right. Yeah, so this is a big movement. There are bills before the U.S. Congress of a similar nature, and so the scenario is okay. So there's a sex trafficking victim. She's been arrested several times for prostitution. This is typical. I assume you talked about that, where this is a process, and there's a I did hear you talk about it's their choice, so you don't force your decision on them. But so when they finally are able to get help and they're recognized as not having committed all these crimes, then it's a little bit awkward for them to try to get a job or to try to get even housing or just to get back on their feet when they have this criminal record there, and if you've ever been committed of a felony, they have to tick yes or whatever. And so the idea is to get, it seems pretty straightforward, the details we can bicker about, but I think it seems pretty straightforward that if people have committed crimes while under the influence of, being trafficked, of a trafficker, that those crimes ought to be expunged from the record and vacated so that they can, have a clean slate. So that is, I think we'll all be working, kind of the same people working on that. But thanks for mentioning that. Yes, sir.
I guess I'd direct this to you and Doc and Chris about the same question I had before. I'm almost 65 years old. I've been around Mulberry Bush a few times, and these kinds of events are awesome for the information we get, but a lot of people will get excited and they'll forget. So is there ongoing opportunity for instruction and more education and reinforcement of what we've already heard through any of you guys? I mean, for instance, you were saying that somebody could take the PowerPoint and go and talk about this. Is there opportunity to get that instruction?
So I'll answer first, and I'm happy to hear from others. Honestly, at the moment, the task force, which is, anyways, we're focused on educating law enforcement service providers. That's kind of, it really started, it was funded a year and a half ago. So we've organized these teams across the state, and we do try to say yes to all these kind of things we're invited to, but to be honest, we don't have a systematic program right now of doing kind of general education like this. Honestly, though, there are a lot of really great groups that are anti-trafficking in Nebraska that have organized things like this. So we can always do more, especially once we get the Speakers Bureau. We can do a lot more because it's you multiply instead of just a few of us who are on the payroll in this speaking. So I think long term we'll have a lot more there. And there was something else I would say. There are, I think, kind of the same thing. There just are a lot. There was that walk on Saturday a week ago. And if you get on, websites or not websites, but email lists, I'm sure I've got a name probably has. Do you have a monthly email or something you send out about events going on? Do you want to respond?
Anyone in the general public can help spread the awareness just by taking it to all the organizations they belong to, the people they come in contact with, their churches. Anybody can help spread the awareness.
And we've got hundreds of people in CMA across this state, across the world actually, but I see opportunity to use the Viking community to great effect if we can get the information really in our heads so that we can communicate correctly to anybody else.
Well, honestly, you sound like a perfect candidate. If you're okay public speaking, you sound like a perfect candidate for this train-the-trainer thing that we'll be doing again early next year. Because of that, because you could, I assume you have meetings probably locally, but also with larger groups and regional things. Yep. I actually did talk to the CMA. I don't know somewhere in Omaha.
The Omaha chapter, I know it's talked to you.
Yeah, so we talked. It was right before Sturgis, and we didn't think we could get anything in place, but to give at least some sort of a calling card, where you guys know what to look for and who to call and things like this, and some training. So I'm open to things like that, but my focus right now is law enforcement. I'm honestly under pressure from the AG's office to say we want some heads on platters, really. I mean, it's not a quote, don't quote me. He wants, we hear about all this research, right? It's happening, so my first job is to help the rest of the state find and prosecute that. But I'm very open to other ideas and any way I can help that. So I guess, honestly, what I'm saying is I'm sort of, instead of it coming from the government, maybe, that kind of education and these kinds of events, I think maybe are better grassroots, because there's motivated people who have actually stepped up and not just showing up to some government program, but actually, it's the people. I'm in Nebraska City right now instead of somewhere else because of people here who've stepped up and decided, let's do this here. Keep in touch. I can give you, I have my business card. If you want to email me, I can keep you on that list once we get the Speaker Bureau if you want to be available for that. So. think my time's up. I'm happy to keep answering questions, but I'm also sensitive to the schedule. This is a long day. It's good information, but it's a lot, isn't it? And it's somewhat intense. I mean, I don't know if we've talked about taking care of yourself, but these are heavy topics. So take fresh air and don't dwell on this too much. I saw the nightmare thing. I think that's a very good advice. So, thanks very much, Bucky. Yeah.
Sorry. All right, I'm going to invite Christine Spangren up now. She is the trafficking specialist for the Salvation Army Safety Program for the southeastern portion of the state of Nebraska. Please welcome Christine.
I promise I won't keep you very long. I just kind of wanted to talk about more of what the safety program is doing. We, like Glenn said, we do collaborate very closely with law enforcement in the AG's office in Nebraska. So, like he said, we received a grant from the Department of Justice, and we work. It's a combined grant, so we work again closely with law enforcement. Most people think of the Salvation Army as just Christmas and red kettles. We actually do a lot more than that. Nationally, there's been anti-human trafficking programs that have taken place for many, many years in Chicago, Ohio, and Michigan. And locally, within the Omaha area, I live in Omaha, but I do serve 19 counties, so the southeastern portion of the state. Our wellspring program serves people who have a history of either prostitution or trafficking. And sometimes what happens is somebody might be a victim, survivor of trafficking, but then they kind of go up in the ranks, so to speak, and then they are kind of taught and recruited how to be a trafficker. So basically, what we do, we help survivors of all forms of trafficking. We serve both survivors of labor and sex trafficking throughout the whole state. Build their lives in a way that is powerful and meaningful to them. So I can't tell them what they want to work on or what their meaning in their life is to them. They can tell me, and I will kind of help them get there. So basically, it's all about the right to make one's own decisions. Self-determination, again, I can't decide what that is for somebody. They can decide what that is for themselves. So, Glenn showed this slide, but so I serve the 19 counties in the southeastern portion of Nebraska, and then my coworkers have a lot of land to cover. We have been up and running since very new program, so we've only been up and running since September of last year. And again, we can serve all survivors. I know there are some programs out there who cannot serve undocumented people, but we can serve documented, undocumented. The program that I work for generally serves adults. But we do collaborate closely with the CACs, which is the Child Advocacy Centers. And this is something that just a lot of survivors are saying that they would like to see more of in services in the state of Nebraska. So when we talk about trauma-informed care, it could be something simple like when somebody is coming into maybe a place that they're going to get some type of service, trying to make it as low barrier as possible. I know a lot of services require a lot of hoops to jump through, a lot of quote red tape, so to speak. So I will go to different service providers throughout my region and see if we can come up with a way to make it a little bit more trauma-informed. So maybe they have a little bit less hoops to jump through. And then these are just some of the things that we provide. Is pretty much all encompassing. The Salvation Army doesn't do it all by ourselves. What we do is we've gone throughout our respective regions and we've built community partners, and so that we all are kind of working together and kind of build a multidisciplinary approach so that, again, we're all working together. So as Glenn said, that we are on call 24/7 for the state of Nebraska. We just alternate being on call for 1 week at a time. And it would be that same 888 number that you heard earlier. So what you would do is you would call that number and then ask to talk to a trafficking specialist in Nebraska, and then that person will screen it and then reroute it to one of us who's on call. And so we do case management, intensive case management, case coordination. We try to build relationships with service providers so that we can really try to advocate in a holistic way with the clients that we serve, with the people that we serve, just so that we have kind of a wraparound approach so that none of the balls are getting dropped, so to speak, in what this client is choosing to accomplish with their lives. We can't do it alone, we need you all. And Glenn touched on the regional services. I'm part of a regional task force, but since I work with adults, and speaking of HIPAA, I make it very clear to the people that I serve that they don't have to report to law enforcement. We don't have to have a confirmed law enforcement case to work with somebody. It can just be a suspected case. And I do not pry on any information. I think it's important to know that if a survivor wants to talk to me about her story or his story, then I'm going to be, actively listen, but I'm not going to purposely go prying for information, because my focus is whatever they want to focus on. So it looks different for everybody. And this is just talking more about regionally, kind of all the different partners that we're trying to work with. I think you had mentioned earlier that the DV shelters, a lot of times that's all that there is, and Nebraska is no different. However, there is a huge need, a huge gap for, especially emergency housing. There was a house that opened that I work very closely with. It's a safe house, and it's not a transitional house, but it's like an emergency acute situations. And so they have kind of been a godsend, just because they are very low barrier. They do have staff 24/7, and they have a therapy dog on site, and it's been pretty amazing working with them. So they've been a key partner with us, but we just need more of those type of places. Because the DV shelters, I've had clients tell me that their pimp has sent in some of his girls to tell, kind of basically say that she needs to be safe to go get her because she was in a DV shelter. So I've had clients tell me they absolutely did not feel safe in DV. Are you guys trained in EMDR?
No, no.
No? Do you have a certain opinion about EMDR? What is your opinion?
Probably not going to be helpful to say.
So, from a personal experience, it's a very scary thing. There are some people that it works amazing for.
Yeah.
And then there are other people who are dealing with trauma, who go through something, and when somebody tries to take them through the EMDR therapy, they get locked in.
I see. Yeah.
So, for those that it's successful for, it's amazing. And for those that it's not,
You can't seem to undo it.
You can't really, okay. Interesting, because I have one therapist that we work with. He is trained in, he's a statewide coordinator for the state of Nebraska, and he works for Lutheran Family Services. And all of my clients have been survivors of sex trafficking except one, and she was not a foreign national. And it happened at a hotel that you and I probably drive by every day. And it worked for her. But the other clients, I feel like, and I'm not sure still, sometimes it just brings up so much, some people are afraid of it because then you're just, yeah. So I'm just curious what your thoughts were.
What is EMDR?
It stands for Eye Movement Desensitization Reprocessing. So, and you're the brain guy, so you would explain it better than I could, but it's a way to kind of release the trauma out of your brain.
Actually, what it does is you
It's bilateral movements.
you go through the trauma and you incorporate pieces to change it in your memory. It's like, there's like a spiritual version that people do, like spiritual prayer counseling. It's the same kind of concept. So it involves different formats, but it's really trying to take the memory and change it. So the problem is, because the brain, how it stores, it will change something, but it never removes the old data. So if they clash, you're stuck. And so it's...
I'm glad to get that perspective. I really do appreciate that because I have not heard that yet.
It's really popular, but it's, like, I work with a lot of vets.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of people, veterans won't do it because it's been so negative for them, but it's a very cool trend.
Yeah.
And so it's like,
yeah.
so we go in.
So your vets, what helps your vets? I know. Sorry, guys. This is total side note.
It's cognitive behavioral therapy with the traumatic that
The
does
CBT.
way more than it, because we see a lot of people. We have these special deals with veterans.
Yeah.
That will have gone through that and they come see us.
Because they're locked.
It's bad.
So then the CBT helps unlock them, or do they never recover?
Yeah.
Oh.
So but the people that are sold on it are very apostolic, evangelistic about it.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. Well, I'll have this discussion with my EMDR guy because he would, he's open to that kind, conversation. Okay, so back to this. Sorry. So these are just some of the networks that we work with. Pretty much everybody. Community partners, you guys are the eyes and the ears of our communities. Pretty much just being aware of our surroundings wherever we are. Concerns about minors. We talked about HIPAA with adults and then being mandatory reporters with minors. So there's already a system in place for minors. And like Glenn said, there's no such thing as a child prostitute. So if there's something that's happening, like some type of sexual, commercial sex act with a minor, that's automatically by state law considered a victim of human trafficking. And these are just the different child advocacy centers throughout the state that we collaborate with. Because sometimes what happens is a kiddo will come into maybe a CAC and then it's disclosed that maybe their parent was being trafficked. And maybe that's kind of what originated maybe CPS getting involved. So we can work with their parent. And there's that number again. And yeah, just reiterating that we do not make an adult report their trafficking. If they choose, we talk to them about it, but if they choose to do that, then we have to sign releases. I can't just give law enforcement information they want unless I have a signed release. We'll walk them through that process. Even if it gets up to the point of prosecution. Glenn mentioned Anthony Swindle. I was at that trial. It was very hard for the victims to do that, but they were very brave, very courageous. So this is, again, back to just what all we provide at the safety program. And that is pretty much it. Alicia's the co-coordinator that works with Glenn very closely. So does anybody have any questions or anything?
I'm
Yeah.
So since you guys have started, how has it been working with like the flow of service and stuff? Have you guys been able to get? Because I'm really interested in what's working for you in this area.
Do you mean like a coordinated effort?
So if somebody comes to you and they've come out of that environment, come out of the life, how have you been able to work with them?
Okay, yeah, so I'll give you a couple different examples. A lot of my people will come to me, there's a lot of, what I've been noticing the last year, a lot of psychosis, and so they come to me very acute. A lot of times I feel like I'm competing with a trafficker pretty much, which, you know, my program is long-term, so if I don't see them for a while, it's not like I'm going to kick you to the curb. Like I know that there's some therapy offices out there that if you, like 3 strikes you're out, will never, ever, put you on our books again. I try to educate, the therapists about, hey, you might not know that they're missing because someone is trying to kill them and they don't want to go outside, but, so I do go into the county jails a lot. I go into the jails a lot, and so I've had people, like I had one girl, she was 19, she was missing from care, she was in the foster care system, ran away, missing from care, ended up in jail because of something that she did with a trafficker. I ended up going to the county jail and talking to her because she had disclosed to the county jail nurse the trafficking. And she decided she wanted to work with my services. I just, introduced myself and explained what we did, and she said she wanted to, work with me. And so, so I just kept meeting with her in jail, just building rapport, And then the judge decided to release her to me and to the safe house on her own recognizance. And so she actually, when she got to the safe house, she started working on a lot of goals. Just the basic things too, like case management stuff, getting her documents, because most of these people don't have her documents. She wanted to go back to school, and so we were working on, all that kind of stuff. But she ended up, I can't remember what happened. Somebody else in the house, I think, triggered her, and she ended up starting to use again, and then all of a sudden she left. And then, I didn't hear from her, and then she was picked up on her warrant because she was released to us. She was picked up on a warrant, and then, so, they kind of ebb and flow sometimes. But again, it's like, it's a revolving door. So, you resurface in 2 months, come on back in, if you really feel like you need to get into treatment, inpatient treatment, let's go try to get that together, help you get that going, or, you need safe housing, or you've got mental health issues, just kind of whatever it looks like. But usually for me, it's documentation, safe housing, documentation. A lot of my people are not at the place at that moment where they can work. So we do a lot of referring to SOAR, which is, I don't know if you know what that is, but they help people get their disability for free, so they don't charge them, and they're very good at what they do. And then just the safe house has a lot of different classes and stuff that they offer them. I know even the therapy dog, her name's Ellie. Oh my gosh, I can't even believe this dog. She was therapeutic to me, going over to that house all the time, and but she would know if somebody was in a flashback or somebody was having a nightmare, she would run to their door, scratch on it, go get up, come up on the bed and start licking their faces, and something so simple is to me, maybe I shouldn't say this, but worth so much more than all the therapy in the world almost. It's just, we're just really trying to build partners so that we're all working together. So we're not feeling like we're like an island, so that, okay, a social worker at an ER will call me, or, and then if the client wants to sign a release so that we can all advocate together, then we will do that, Does that answer your question?
Yeah, which is more.
Okay.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Anybody else?
So do you see using the motorcycle community
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Is there some kind of extra training to work with you, or how do you see that working?
I mean, to me it's basic, but it's not so basic. Just like when we treat people with when we put all these terms on things like a trauma-informed way, but really it's just treating a person how we would like to be treated. I mean, that's all it really is. We do have all these coin phrases that we say, but it's just really treating somebody like trying to put yourself in their shoes. But, it's not necessarily obvious to everybody, so maybe going through some type of trauma-informed training. I mean, we can provide that too. So, if you're interested, or absolutely, like kind of give examples of what that looks like. We do work with a lady, her name's Kim Carpenter, and she would actually be way better at it than I would because she's an actual survivor of complex trauma, and she can talk about what it's like to, work with a trauma survivor. And yeah, because people don't realize too, if you just start talking about certain things, and if they do start going into a flashback or something, it's kind of hard to come out of that. And then people might get scared of that and not really understand that it's kind of a normal reaction.
Yeah.
Not be too scared of it.
And that's kind of what I've been trying to get across as far as the education, because you can be an intelligent person and have no wisdom. You know what I'm saying? If you don't go in with wisdom, and in whatever situation it is, I lay carpet for a living, and I can roll a piece of carpet out in somebody's room and say, install this. And they might be able to get it done, but they might screw it up really bad.
Yeah, I would probably screw that up.
Yeah. So that's kind of what I'm looking for, is more, I'm smart enough to do things, but I don't have the wisdom in this kind of a situation.
Well, and it depends on kind of your background, because when they were talking just a little bit ago, I need to go and apologize to Dana, because, in my environment, hugging somebody is an expression of love and concern for them. And I went up and hugged her this morning, and I had no idea that I was doing something that could have caused her a lot of discomfort. So those are the kinds of things we're talking about, because if you didn't grow up in that environment, you have no idea about the kinds of triggers that, like Doc was talking, well-meaning people
Right.
can go up and do something that, their intentions were 100% good, but.
Right. And I'm just gonna be honest. I feel like, to me, people get up and talk all the time, from the AG's office to the Salvation Army to all different kinds of professional capacities. But to me, the survivors truly are the real experts. And that's what I love about, some of the publications that Nebraska has put out, because they've actually asked survivors in Omaha and Lincoln area, what works, what doesn't, what do you want to see? How can we best help you? Because if I don't ask you, and everybody might be different too. So maybe, but we do have peers that don't work for the Salvation Army, but they are part of the task force that are survivors of sex trafficking, that would be willing to, I'm sure would be willing to give a training on that as well. And so, you could email me and I could put you in contact with those people. Sir?
There's a research manual that was put out a couple years ago called Survivors Speak. And when I read through that whole thing, that certainly enlightened me a whole lot.
What did you learn? What are some of the things you learned?
Well, everybody has a different experience, and they react differently, and they need different things. But it opened up a whole new vision.
Right. And I think it's, we talk about, the term trauma-informed care in this context, regarding survivors of trafficking. But I think that if we treat people in general, across the board, somebody that we're waiting in line at the grocery store, somebody at customer service who is acting put out because they don't want to help us, truly, if we could try to shift our own mind, even in all of our contexts of our everyday life, and kind of try to put ourselves in their shoes that we don't know. Because a lot of times then we get defensive. But again, I just feel like as a whole, across the board, we should treat anybody, no matter what we know about them, regardless. My history is working with, because I've only been doing this for a year, but my history is working with chronically homeless and adults with severe mental illness. So I've been part of a street outreach for years and years, just going under bridges, lined up with, mattresses and tent cities. And again, we don't force them to get housing. Some people choose not to, but it's just kind of meeting people where they're at. So.
I think that research document is online.
What's it called?
Survivors Speak.
Okay. I know the Omaha Women's Fund, they also put out the one that I told you about. It's called Nothing About Us Without Us. And that's on the Omaha Women's Fund website. So you can read that. It's called Nothing About Us Without Us. So it's just from, survivors talking about how they want to be treated. Pretty much just like a person, like all of us are. But you guys are welcome to call me. My phone, if you have any questions, or I do have cards, you come across something, you can let me know. My phone's on. I usually shut my phone off at 4:30. Nebraska City is part of my region. So, and then after that, if it's after hours, then you can call the hotline. Anything else?
So I just want to thank everybody for coming, and thank all the presenters and all the volunteers. If you'll please just give one more round of applause to everybody. Thank you. It's been a really big day and a lot to process. I just want to leave you with one final thought. Nelson Mandela said, "Education is the most powerful weapon we can use to change the world." And I just want to challenge each of you to do something with what you learned today. Okay, Pastor Carl, can you come up and close us in prayer, please?
You guys kind of touched on it a little bit, that we have a lot of unhelpful thoughts sometimes about God, and a lot of ideas that don't really help, that we proliferate. One thing I know about God is this: that God wants to step in to your situation, and God wants to help with the messes in our life. And just like trauma happens in community, and hurt happens in community, healing happens in community. It happens when people come up alongside other people. And I'm so thankful for you. They say a revolution starts with one person. Movements start with one person. Well, there's 20 or 30 that something could start from. And I encourage you to continue. And I know that's on all of your minds, but it leaves really quickly. And I encourage you, if you don't pray for anything else, pray for determination. Keep going. Amen. Heavenly Father, God, thank you for what you've done today. It's not an accident that we're here. You have a purpose. You have a reason. God, that's in each one of our hearts. I pray very simply for one thing, that for continuance, for perseverance, to continue on with exactly what you've been speaking to our heart about. We'll continue on, we'll learn, we'll become educated, and we'll also just be determined to keep at it. to find that next step that you want us to take. Whether that's in our own recovery, whether that's in our own healing, whether that's come up alongside of someone else and become a partner, a helper to them. God, maybe that's for someone in here to lead and go on and start something new, start something else that hasn't been started yet. God, just give us the courage, the willingness to face vulnerability, the courage to step out, the determination to keep going. And God, then just remind us to give you all the praise and glory for what's done. We pray it all in Jesus' name. Amen. You're dismissed.